Trauma is the great human equalizer. I know right now that you're online and you're watching this video and you are looking for some way to either help yourself after trauma or help those you know or serve recover after trauma. And I know that with practice, and practice is the optimal moral, you can recover after trauma and help others achieve recovery as well. Now, when I talk about practice, honestly, I cannot tell you how important this piece is, because without practice, the wound of trauma, the power in which it impacts our minds, our bodies, and our beings becomes such a deep wounding that it becomes imperative that we make it our business every day to work daily, to do what we need to do to recover after trauma. And there's no shortcut. So I want to really encourage you to recognize that it is not a failure if you need to work daily, and that is why Dr. Eric Gentry and myself call our work trauma practice, because we understand that it requires daily practice to recover. So one of the questions I get most often in my practice and through the social media blogs and emails is, why can't I get over this? And if you're asking yourself that question months or even years after a difficult event, then it is time to take a closer look. Terrible things can and do happen to good people and continue to lead strong emotions long after the event has passed. This is especially true when you've experienced a traumatic event. Our bodies are wired to get us out of danger, and this mechanism can continue to work over time, even when the danger is long in the past. Real people, real life trauma is the great human equalizer. Unfortunately, bad things can leave us feeling out of control in our lives, and yet a traumatic event is more common than we can even imagine. Over 82% of those surveyed in 2013 admitted to experiencing a trauma in their lifetime. And of those 82%, more than 20% could be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet many people don't recognize that they continue to suffer because of a trauma from the past. And even worse, they may not realize that there are really practical things that can help. I want to tell you 3 stories with a common theme. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Dr. Baranowsky, and I'm a clinical psychologist with a specialization in after-trauma care. I have dedicated my career to assisting trauma survivors and training professionals who work with trauma survivors. And I know that there are approaches that make a huge difference. Now, I don't want to tell you that everybody will recover to the same degree and using the exact same approaches, because that's simply not true. What has to happen is we need to apply the right approaches for each individual and figure out what works well and continue to dedicate ourselves to different approaches and continued application and daily practice in order to get ourselves to a better place, consistently better place over time. So, story number 1. Jessica walks into my office and she's wearing a beautiful suit and she's got a gorgeous haircut, and she's saying she was polished would have been an understatement. She explained that she ran a high-profile ad agency and had no close friends, no children, and no spouse. She had a health scare last year at the age of 42, and I could feel her loneliness as she described lying in bed after surgery with no one she felt close enough to call when she woke up. She explained to me that she didn't feel safe sharing her vulnerability with even one person, and I said one word: lonely, and she started to sob quietly. This breakdown was Jessica's breakthrough and the beginning of her year of revelations and growth. Now, Peter. Peter grew up in a rough part of town where fitting in meant bullying or being at the risk of being bullied. And the mistreatment started in his own family with his own two brothers who picked on him daily. As soon as he was old enough, he joined the military to get away from poverty, to get some education, and to start a new life far away from a family who just seemed to have no interest and no resources for him. He deployed overseas shortly after successfully completing basic training, and he was at the top of his class and finally feeling really good about himself. Amanda was a special woman. She loved being outdoors, hiking, biking, and canoeing. Wilderness adventures were times filled with a deep sense of awe and full immersion into what she felt was a divine world. But sadly, her peace was broken and her sense of comfort in the wilderness was shattered when she found herself in a struggle for survival rather than a journey of awe. What tied Amanda, Peter, and Jessica together? Each experienced a terrible, life-altering, traumatic event, and they felt shaken up and overwhelmed by feelings of fear, jumpy sensations in their bodies, and thoughts and worries they just could not shut out or stop. Now, there are a number of really common trauma symptoms that can last for months or even years and are very commonly seen in individuals who are suffering with the aftermath of a traumatic event. One of them is intrusion. And intrusion really refers to thoughts or flashbacks or nightmares of the trauma. And these thoughts, they can come into our mind at any time, just disrupting, cracking open our world in the moment. We may be having a very pleasant afternoon with friends, and all of a sudden we have this terrible thought that just undermines our feeling of connection with others or our sense of safety in the moment. Avoidance of things that remind you of the traumatic experience is another one of those common symptoms. So this might mean that even things that you enjoyed doing before the trauma, you avoid because they might remind you of the trauma or even make you feel vulnerable. Negative changes to thoughts and mood. Well, think about it this way. You may start to look at the world as a completely unsafe place, and that might not have been how you felt about the world before the trauma, or maybe you don't trust people anymore. One way or the other, the way you think about the world is negatively tainted now. And finally, reactivity, including disturbed sleep, poor concentration, startled response, or irritability. Amanda, Peter, and Jessica were all diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. They each received treatment and they each recovered. Getting the right care meant that they were able to move on in their lives, feeling less bothered about the past, better about life, and more hopeful about the future. Before getting help, Jessica believed that she was unlovable. She experienced years of being sexually abused by an uncle. She grew up believing that she could never trust anyone. As a child, she tried to get her mother to stop the abuse, only to hear her say, "What are you doing to provoke this?" Wow, what a terrible thing for her to face. The very person she reached out to, the one she hoped would protect her, was now telling her it was her fault on some level. She chose to protect herself by never letting anyone get too close to her, and she thought this would protect her, but in the end she was isolated and only had her career for company. Not a lot of protection. Peter excelled in his military role, moving up through the ranks and finally feeling like he had a family that cared for him, valuing his skills and his contributions. On patrol, he was traveling in an armored vehicle when an IED, which is an improvised explosive device, detonated. The vehicle flipped and he sustained a spinal injury, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. He had partial use of his hands. life was never going to be the same for him. And finally, Amanda went through each day in an emotional fog. She was no longer the smiling, vibrant woman her family and friends remembered just a year earlier. She couldn't come to terms with the terrible drowning of her childhood friend. Sandy and Amanda were paddling their canoe on the rapids when a storm worsened. They were both thrown suddenly, along with their belongings, into the cold water, and she struggled to pull herself to shore. Shivering, she realized that she was alone. Sandy was nowhere in sight, and she asked herself, how could this be? Sandy was the stronger swimmer, and she was right behind her, heading to shore. Nothing after that made any sense to Amanda. She blamed herself and vowed to never forgive herself. She was plagued by memories of that day, and she played the memory over and over again with no relief in sight. Recovering after trauma, we know, requires that we recognize what's happened to us. Part of it really is learning about the impact and educating ourselves about what happens to us. We know that trauma can take a terrible toll on our nervous system, leaving us feeling jumpy and constantly anxious. One woman explained to me that she constantly felt like her heart would jump out of her chest. Another described how the mind never stopped rewinding the terrible moments. And yet, we now understand that not only can we recover from traumatic events, our bodies are actually wired to find ways to reclaim calm and adjust to life after trauma. Makes sense. We're all human beings, and there's always been trauma in the world. It makes sense that our bodies have a mechanism for recovery as well. The best approaches after trauma include 3 basic steps. Harnessing calm, and this includes any activities that retrain the body and mind to relax and unwind. And we need to do this deliberately and practice regularly, as trauma can leave us in a chronically agitated state. The next one is working through trauma memories, and although this can seem like a frightening thing to do, it can often prove to be the most important step because it allows us to make sense of and get over life's most difficult moments. There are many approaches used today that are truly informative: EMDR, thematic map, CBT trauma therapy, somatic therapy. Anyways, the next one is, and the final step is reconnecting to life today. And this really means integrating everything we've learned and moving back into life as we want to live it today. The steps to get here may require some backtracking. We sometimes need to return to regular activities one little step at a time, or find new things that work better for us right now after the trauma. So some tips for you after trauma. Whatever you choose to do, it's critical to know that you do not have to do this alone, and that there are people and programs that can help you wherever you are. Here are 3 small things that might help. 1, start by learning about the impact of trauma. What PTSD can feel like taming wild horses. 2, read the 25 tips for dealing with trauma. And finally, begin the first 10 days of the video stabilization program. That's part of the trauma treatment online program. These first 10 days are absolutely free. All you have to do is visit whatisptsd.com and select the 10 days absolutely free link. And finally, use the breath trainer so that you can develop a good breathing pattern that will help your body settle down and recover. So we have a couple of tools to help you with that as well. You can watch 3-6 breathing, which is a YouTube video. The breath is the window into the nervous system. Or you can use our Breathe 911 app, which can be downloaded on iPhone, iOS devices, and on Android devices. Remember, daily practice is not a luxury item in trauma recovery. And I do hope that this video has helped you, if you're seriously ready to deeply dedicate yourself to growth, you might find the full trauma treatment online program, which gives you practical trauma recovery tools daily, a help in your journey. Visit whatisptsd.com and have a gentle day.